RealAg Live. And welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Thanks a lot for tuning in today. Hope you're having yourself a great Wednesday. Really appreciate you joining us. If you want to participate in today's discussion, which will be all politics, I'm really looking forward to this today. You can join in the discussion by asking your question or making a comment by putting it in the box, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. And today's guest is somebody that is no stranger to those of you that are big fans of real agriculture. She appears regularly on our Friday RealAg Issues panel on RealAg Radio. Let's bring her in. It is Meagan Murdoch of National Public Relations. Meagan, how are you?
Good. How are you, Shaun?
It's good. Well, you know what? For the RealAg audience, it's good to put a face to a name. They hear your voice frequently on the Friday show, so it's great for you to join us here on RealAg Live today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to see everyone.
Yeah, so before we go any further, for some people, they're not going to be aware of some of the things that National Public Relations does. Maybe give us a bit of a quick background there.
Yeah. So we are a public relations firm. We started about 40 years ago, so definitely one of the oldest PR firms in Canada, if not the oldest. We have about 300 consultants like myself across Canada, with offices from coast to coast. So, right from Nova Scotia to BC. With a big team here in Toronto, which is where I am, but also a hearty team in Ottawa, where a lot of politics happens as well. And we work in a range of industries, and I obviously love to focus on the agriculture industry from time to time.
Yeah, and absolutely. And you're no stranger to agriculture whatsoever. You had at one point in your past, you went from coast to coast and around the world, flying around with former Ag Minister Jerry Ritz as well. So I'm sure you could tell some Jerry stories. I'm not sure we'll get to those today, but they're always good.
Isn't this a G-rated program?
Yeah, well, we don't want YouTube to shut us down. But how long were you a sidekick of Jerry's then?
Just long enough, I'm sure he'd say. I think we were together for about 4 years all up. So I was really fortunate to join him as a press secretary in 2008. So at the relative outset of the Harper government, and then stayed with him for another 4 years and was his director of communications for several years. Had the great fortune to travel a lot of corners of this great country, meet a lot of our agriculture community and industry along the way, make some terrific friends in the industry, lifelong friends, really. And probably one of the biggest highlights of my career to date, hands down.
Yeah, pretty cool. 2008, that's when RealAg started. So yeah, I remember those early days, and you me phoning or emailing, and you're probably saying like, "Who the hell is this person?" Okay. Yeah, exactly. So now National Public Relations has put out a white paper entitled "A Complete Overview of Canada's Key Political Conversations in 2021." How would you describe the political climate right now in Canada as we're into the first quarter here of the year?
Yeah, I'd have to say it's mixed. And anyone that downloads the white paper off the National Public Relations website will probably find the same. The white paper, just for those listening, was a project of really at least 24 consultants from across Canada. That's the number of people that it takes to put together something like this, to actually analyze province by province what is happening, who are the key players, what are the key questions that will be asked in the near and medium term. So I think when you ask what's the climate, it's very much mixed and takes a lot of hands and minds to figure out what is happening across the country right now.
So we've heard a lot during COVID, we're all in this together. Now, politically speaking, let's apply that. Do you think that COVID-19 has heightened partisanship across the country?
I think if we try to think back to about a year ago, maybe a little bit later, April, May, you will remember how much relative collaboration there was, and cooperation amongst political parties, and as well as between the federal and provincial level. And that carried through for many months, many, like I would say until the end of 2020. Here in Ontario, it was pretty surprising, really, how well Premier Doug Ford and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, as well as Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister, have been getting on this past year. It's been remarkable. It was needed. It was required. There wasn't really a choice to be partisan. I think Canadians wouldn't have stood for that, given what we were going through. But that level of cooperation and nonpartisanship amongst different political parties did last a lot longer than I think anyone was expecting it to. I do feel a change of tide now, though. Vaccines are here. The immediate threat, particularly in our long-term care homes, has been mitigated with vaccination distribution to those homes. So people are starting to, go back to their ways a bit in those partisan ways, to be like, okay, we're getting through this, now what? And so I feel like we're seeing a reversal in that aspect.
Yeah, the vaccine rollout, I think you're totally correct to make that as a marker, because the feds are in charge of procurement or securing the supply, but the provinces have to do the execution in the rollout on the ground. And so you have kind of that finger pointing going like this, and depending on the week or what has happened, they probably have both sides have arguments to be right or justifiable to blame them for being wrong, right? And so we're just sort of falling back into the way that we would expect now. But I don't necessarily think it's as partisan as maybe we see south of the border. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that would be fair. I mean, the south of the border vaccine distribution is going much better than ours. I think they're up in the mid-20s right now. So up here, I mean, you have to give the federal government some credit in this regard. We are one country out of, the world trying to get our hands on vaccines. I am, a lot of people complain or claim that Canada should be first in line. We should have all the vaccines. Why aren't we getting them? And I'm a little bit of the mindset, like, why should we get them any sooner than another country? Whereas in fact, really the Western world was the last to get COVID. Should it not be the Eastern countries that get the vaccines first, as they've been dealing with this longer? So, I mean, in that regard, the federal government appears to be, doing what they can. I'm being generous there to get their hands on vaccines. There's a lot of uncertainty in the global production. So the last minute changes in the number of vaccines that Canada is getting is really throwing provinces, into a corner, because they set up this distribution system and then they're told a week before that, oh, sorry, you're going to be short 20,000. They're just sitting there going, okay, like, what are we supposed to do with that? But I can't emphasize enough how massively complex the system is.
Yeah, my parents were supposed to get the vaccine 2 weeks ago at Costco, and the day before they got I think it was an email saying, sorry, too bad. And I think now they get it next week, so it'd be a 3-week delay. So they kind of went through some of that. Now we have. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
How amazing is it that Costco's giving out vaccines? I knew Costco was great, but I had no idea they were involved in the vaccine.
And it doesn't even come in a flat. It's like just one dose, right? It's usually when you go to Costco, you get a big flat of ketchup or enough ketchup to last you like a month, maybe like 6 months, stuff like that. So we have seen some provincial elections transpire during COVID, but there's a lot of speculation about whether or not we're going to have a federal election. What are yourself and some of the insiders at National Public Relations thinking? Do they think that Prime Minister Trudeau is going to call an election here prior to the end of 2021?
Yeah, I wish I had the crystal ball on that one. It's really anyone's guess. It could go a few different ways for sure. Definitely, we can talk about kind of the pros and cons of going now versus later versus 6 months ago. Without a doubt, COVID has, altered the dynamic. The Trudeau government, really had the center stage in managing COVID over the last year. And that left opposition parties really actively trying to get some media attention, get some airtime, get in front of Canadians. Really hard to get in front of Canadians when Parliament doesn't sit. Parliament was suspended for a good amount of last year, and they were operating in a virtual setting, which, naturally takes a bit of the energy out of the room, probably for the better in some respects. But there has been a real shift in dynamic there. And I think for the better part of 2020, Trudeau is getting a lot of kudos. I hate to say it, but, I was one of those people in the summer saying, I do think the Liberal government is handling this as best they can, with the Prime Minister's daily updates outside of Rideau Cottage. I had to give it to them at the time that they were doing the best they could to communicate a really, really complex and ever-changing situation. Now, I'm not sure that really remains. People are frustrated with the state of the vaccine rollout. There's no doubt. And as they talked about, the provinces are starting to push back a little bit, sure, on that vaccine rollout. So it's not all rosy for Trudeau any longer.
Yeah, but it hasn't impacted his popularity, though. Like I've seen a number of polls where, considering some of the blunders that have happened, never mind just on COVID, but some of the other stuff that's happened as well, and controversies, his popularity has really not been impacted.
Yeah, and I mean, he is helped by the fact that his opposition parties have not been taking away much attention or points on those surveys. With Erin O'Toole, relatively recently being elected leader of the Conservative Party, the NDP, somewhat of the third pillar there that doesn't really impact the major debate. It's helpful to Trudeau to not have a strong opposition. And so he'll be thinking about that now as to, when he pulls the pen. So I would say the next logical point in time is following the delivery of a budget. For sure. I mean, we know that it's coming finally.
2 years. 2 years.
Yeah. But the budget, and I worked for the Minister of State for Finance for a time as well, and was involved in several budget rollouts. The budget is, by all intents and purposes, a communications document and a strategy document, akin to a campaign platform. And so he will be tabling one, we hear, on April 19th. And that should be essentially their next campaign platform. He then will be going into summer, which is a relatively better time to be campaigning during a global pandemic. They'll be able to host events outside. They'll be able to, the numbers should go down this summer. The holding one in the fall, we can expect the numbers to probably go up again in the fall when people go indoors. So he's got to be thinking about that. And then do you wait longer to, give Mr. O'Toole time to, use the summer out of Ottawa and build his reputation and profile with Canadians. So I think those are some of the factors in Mr. Trudeau's mind, whether he goes now or later. And my money is on April. It's following a budget. Whether I don't imagine the Conservatives will support the budget in any way, shape, or form. It comes down to whether the NDP will. And they could be promised some big spending in order to secure their support for the budget. But if they don't, then the government will fall on a confidence motion, because the votes on the budget are confidence motions. But even if the NDP do support, there's certainly a chance that the Prime Minister says, he wants to go to Canadians for their support on the budget and the direction of the government, and he brings the government down himself.
Yeah. Ron brings up Trudeau's popularity is more from lack of a strong opposition than a vote of confidence. What is it about the Conservatives right now? Scheer really never resonated. It was kind of like a bit of just a lull. I don't know how the best way to describe it. O'Toole came out of the blocks with a little bit more passion and he looked to be a lot more sellable to a lot of Canadians, but it seems as of late he's kind of fallen into the same sort of just can't gain political traction. What exactly is going on with the Conservative Party right now?
I think there's probably a few points that is challenging him. One, I've already spoken to it. The government is getting a lot of airtime. They are making a lot of decisions. They are rolling out money. They are announcing different bits of money every day, as you well know, with even several agriculture minister announcements a week. When you're up against that, it is always challenging for the opposition party, regardless of who they are. The government just has more to say. And I do think they're keeping their powder dry to some extent, not rolling out their own platform too soon. They don't know when they might go to the polls. They're focusing on making sure that they are ready to go to the polls at a moment's notice, building the team, making sure their platform is ready. But I don't think we will see him make any major announcements until we've got a little bit more certainty there, because you do want to keep it for an election. And I would say, while we, might feel as though he's in the background right now, it all comes down to those, typically 36 days of a campaign, right? Anything can happen. As I well learned in the last election that I was part of in 2015, we went into that 3-month campaign thinking that this was a sure thing. There was no way that Canadians were going to elect Justin Trudeau. And obviously things changed majorly during that campaign, and we've seen major changes happen in even a much shorter campaign. So I definitely wouldn't rule him out. It all comes down to how you execute around a campaign.
Yeah, I'm not sure O'Toole would want an election called based on how they are having a hard time getting traction. You mentioned the Conservative platform as something that people like Andrew Coyne have been very critical of. Is what does this party stand for? Instead of being, anti-Trudeau, that can't be your platform. You're anti-Trudeau. You have to have things in your platform. Let's get to some of the questions here from the audience. I appreciate everybody tuning in here. Phil wants to know, will the Bloc gain on the Liberals in Quebec? Are they second choice for almost all Quebecers?
Yes. Yes. They are a fierce competitor in Quebec to both the Conservatives and the Liberals. But that is where you can win or lose an election. Obviously, Ontario is also vote rich in that regard. But you're right. The more the Bloc can take away from the Liberals, the better chance even the Conservatives may have.
Right. Okay, let's get to another one here. Question from Kara watching on Facebook. With the latest decision from the Supreme Court of Canada regarding the carbon tax, what's your take on current climate policies, and how can agriculture work to communicate any concerns?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit on Friday. We probably didn't have nearly enough time on the RealAg panel to talk about this Supreme Court ruling and where we go from here. There is a lot to say that the Supreme Court has ruled that the Prime Minister has the legal right to impose climate policy as he sees. As climate climate change, climate risk is, not bound by a provincial border. It very much is something that affects the whole country, and therefore the federal government can play a role in introducing the carbon tax as they wish. What then it comes down to is how can the provinces be as influential as they possibly can in defining federal policy, and what can they do at the provincial level as well to contribute and perhaps make it so that the federal government doesn't have to impose such strict policy. So it can be a provincial by provincial decision. We've seen some premiers already say, and rightly, while the Prime Minister has legal authority to impose a carbon tax, he shouldn't, and that there are other ways to reach our climate goals without imposing a carbon tax. So I think it comes down to a conversation that happens next.
So I'm not being flippant when I ask this, but is climate policy the only priority for this current government? Like, even when they come out, like when we hear the budget will be layered in climate-related stuff. When we see anything that's rolled out that has to do with any department, it's climate. Is climate change really the policy for this government?
Whether it is or not, it isn't anymore. What we will be hearing and seeing from this government is going to all be about the economy and the economic rebuild due to COVID. I think there will also be a lot of talk around health transfers and what happens there post-pandemic. Provinces are looking for significant increases to health transfers. So, do they add to that in the budget? I do think we'll see some, maybe one of their more proactive policies is around creating a more equitable society. So that is, taking from the rich, giving to the poor. There could be some improvements there to help the middle class, as they say. I would say that's their second pillar, really, next to green strategy.
Okay. One of the things we've seen too is maybe a bit of a greater push to decentralization. So, but that hasn't stopped the provinces for asking for more money. We're going to see we're going to see a huge battle, as you mentioned, over health payments. But the provinces want control over how they spend the money, and no strings attached to these dollars. That's a pretty bit of an awkward battle, I think.
It's awkward, but it's not unsurprising. It's been the conversation for decades.
Yeah.
Like that's not really new. I think it's been elevated by the pandemic, particularly around health. But you're right. It was all cooperation last year, and all rosy between a lot of the provinces and the federal government. I feel that's changing. They are looking for the feds to either back off or pony up with some major cash on health. We will see probably a lot of discussion there around long-term care in places like Quebec and Ontario.
Yeah. Chris, watching on YouTube, has a question. The Conservative Party of Canada is having an identity crisis. Does Leader O'Toole have time and the ability to unify the party before an election, whenever that is?
Yeah, good question, Chris. You're right. I do hope he can retain, at least I would say, unity of the Conservative Party, because we are still one party, even following the most recent convention. And, relatively still a young party since, then Prime Minister Harper, Leader Harper, was able to bring the party together. And you're right, like, we might not always be perfectly unified. I don't know that O'Toole can make it so. I don't think any leader has really ever been able to do that, including Stephen Harper. We're able to bring the party together so that we can be represented in Parliament more strongly. But I don't think he's ever going to have, 100%. Even myself, I like some of our policies, not all of them, still going to be a conservative. And I hope that's true for my fellow members as well.
Yeah, he's got some challenges, and one of those is, did he make this bed in the sense that, during the leadership race, he really tried to appeal to social conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
Some at the time accused him of, maybe pretending to be more of a social conservative than he potentially really was, and then as soon as he got the leadership, he, maybe showed how he really believes. He's done in a race. You say sometimes things to get elected. That's what an election looks like. So he's definitely got some challenges in that regard.
Yeah, leadership races are not reflective of an election campaign. They're very, very different.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so he did have to take a different tone and a different direction, trying to win the leadership, and he will most certainly have to move to the center in some ways to secure an election victory. There's no way around it. He knows that. It's just a matter of how does he balance the different priorities of the party, making sure that everyone feels listened to and that we can keep our party together and strong.
Yeah, good point. So Richard brings up a good question here. Okay, Richard's watching on YouTube, and we mentioned that climate policy is really, really important for this government. Are other countries moving as fast on climate change as we are in Canada? What are your thoughts on that, Meagan?
Well, for those who have tuned in on some of the RealAg panels that I've been on, might know I recently got back to Canada after working in New Zealand for about 3.5 years with the New Zealand dairy industry over there. So I could speak really to New Zealand's pretty progressive approach on climate. I can't speak for the whole world as to whether, where everyone's at. I think most importantly, we have to think about where the US is at as our major trading partner and someone we share a border with, making sure that, we're not disadvantaging our farmers or agriculture industry when we're changing or deciding policy on climate. In terms of New Zealand, they are moving quite progressively in some ways, and in some ways not as much. And that comes down to geography. They still rely quite a bit on coal, for instance. They don't have a gas line to the South Island. So a lot of the dairy processing plants in the South Island still rely on coal. So it's a bit of a dark mark on their fairly sustainable and progressive approach. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, is extremely progressive in this space, and their their biggest company, Fonterra, who I advised, they are changing, over the last few years. It's night and day. They have really on their sustainable policy. They've put out, I think, 3 sustainability reports now with very specific targets that they are working to hit every year. And certainly in that Southeast Asia, up against Europe, dairy producers and the Australian producers, it really is what it comes down to. How can you produce sustainably? They've recently introduced a incentive for dairy farmers. So if they are hitting certain sustainable benchmarks on their farm, they get an extra couple cents per kg, which they didn't think they could do that. More so because they're a cooperative, and paying some farmers over others just doesn't fly. But over several years, they really convinced the membership that this was the right way to go, and farmers really backed it. So I would say their view over there, even if at the farm level, of sustainability and its importance, and their acceptance of climate change is, I would say, dramatically ahead of Canada.
Do they have a price on pollution? Do they have a carbon tax?
They do not, no, but they do have a target to reduce their emissions. I would say that they have the lowest lowest carbon footprint per liter of milk production in the world. So it's very, very small. I think that's largely helped by the fact that it's completely pasture-based. And they do a lot on soil management and feed management as well. So they're leading in terms of that. Yeah.
Okay. So follow up here. If there is an election called in Canada in 2021, Phil, watching on Twitter, says, what will the Conservative plan to get? What will be their plan to get to 170 seats? Ignore the base and appeal to urban Ontario, Quebec, or is the route through the suburbs? What are your thoughts on that, or maybe all of the above?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what their plan is. I can speak to what I think it might be. They will definitely need to win Ontario in a major, major way. And that does come down to winning the Greater Toronto area. So very much urban area. And, you know, when it does come to the base, we have seen it in other elections as well. We know that we, don't have a strong challenger from the right. And, that means that when our very, very true Conservative voters go to the polls, there really is only one choice for them, and that is the Conservative Party of Canada. And it's not the Liberal Party at all. So, I'm not going to say you have to, you don't ignore them. We don't take them for granted by any stretch of the imagination, but you do need to know how you're going to win. They will also need a very strong NDP. So I think they're really hoping that Jagmeet Singh gets his act together and starts putting up a bit of a force, because we saw in, was it 2011, when actually we saw it in 2015 as well. It was 2015 when the NDP completely collapsed. Yeah. And that is how Trudeau got government. And then I guess in 2011, we saw the reverse, where the Liberals completely collapsed. And that was how the NDP got into official opposition.
That was Jack Layton in the Orange Wave.
It was. Yeah. So those two things will need to happen. We will need a strong NDP and a strong Liberal Party if we are to actually come up the middle and get government.
Yeah, so Logan asked a good question related to, I think it's sort of in the economic recovery, and you mentioned that you think the biggest election item will be the economy, and it was James Carver that said it's the economy, stupid, if I remember. Or James Carville, right? Carville. So Logan asks, chances of primary residence, capital gains tax, all the other taxes they're talking about, is this the things that Canadians want to hear? That, taxes, almost like from an episode of Robin Hood. Is that what they want to hear in when we're maybe close to an election?
No, I don't think so. The Liberal government has said they are not planning to raise taxes on Canadians. There is certainly a lot of worried people out there around the increase to the capital gains tax. That is something that has been used about quite strongly since about 2016. Everyone thought that the Liberal Party would bring that in, despite the fact that it was not in their election campaign in 2015. It also wasn't in their election campaign in 2019. But it has been used about. The NDP are recommending a move to 75%. And now would be the time. If the capital gains is ever going to increase, it hasn't increased in 20 years. If it is going to, now is the time. Massive deficits to cover for. So I personally think it's possible on that one. But the government has said that they're not looking at increased taxes, although the mandate letter for the Minister of Finance in January, I can pull up the the text specifically, but it said something to the effect of find ways to, more equitably approach, or find ways to essentially tax the rich. That's what it said, but I can pull up there.
I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what it said.
Yeah.
Tax the rich. And how we define rich, though, I think is, like that. It's easy to say tax the rich, but how that rich is defined, that's an extremely interesting debate.
Yeah. It said identify additional ways to tax extreme wealth inequity, including by finalizing amendments to the Income Tax Act to limit the stock option deduction for high-income individuals at large established firms.
Yeah, and how we've seen a real bump in real estate prices in Canada across the country on some of those primary residences and second homes for some people in those extremely rich categories, however they want to define that. It probably gives a little bit more of a green light to really tackle this primary residence stuff too.
Yeah. And if you've read anything about the real estate industry lately, my God, it's just going gangbusters across the country, mostly Toronto and Vancouver, but Toronto is out of this world crazy. The prices are skyrocketing. Condos are going for 100, 200 more than they're on the market for. It's mental. And thanks to the low interest rate.
Yeah. Clarification here from Horse Lake Ranch. So he asks if it's legal to implement the carbon tax because of the threat of climate change, is it illegal to cancel it? I'm assuming he means can the provinces cancel it? No, they can't. But the federal government, the federal government could at a later date decide to repeal the tax if they wanted to, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. The question was about whether or not the federal government had the constitutional right to impose that tax on the provinces, not specific to whether or not you could make it a carbon tax. Is that I'm paraphrasing there now too. I'm getting out of my jurisdiction, Meagan, but is that a good description?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Wow, this has been a lot of fun. We had some great audience participation today. This has been fantastic. I encourage everybody to go to the National Public Relations website. You can download their white paper, a complete overview of Canada's key political conversations in 2021. Meagan Murdoch has been our guest today. She joins us frequently on RealAg Radio for the RealAg Issues panel on Fridays, so you can download that podcast. Or, of course, listen to it on Rural Radio 147 on Sirius XM 4:30 Eastern. Replay at 7 in the morning every weekday as well. Meagan, thank you so much for joining us here today on RealAg Live.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for all the questions, everyone. I do hope to chat with you again soon.
Absolutely. Great. We're definitely having you back. People love the political conversation, especially when we possibly might have an election and a budget for the first time in 2 years. It's like Halloween or Christmas or hey, it's Easter. We'll go with that. Thanks a lot, Meagan. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Bye.
Hey, I encourage everybody to, speaking of RealAg Radio, check out RealAg Radio today, 4:30 Eastern. We got a great lineup. We're going to have a full breakdown of that USDA quarterly stocks perspective planting report. Wow. Check out the markets today. Green on the screen. What does it mean in the days ahead in a very short trading week because of Good Friday? Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live. Chat with you later. Cheers.